Hello, it is Delaney James. This week we are going to focus on blood, more specifically what erythrocytes are, how a blood type is determined, and we're going to focus on transfusion reaction and a little bit of research done about blood and COVID-19. So our objectives is what is an erythrocyte shape and structure. Hemoglobin, what is its role in our blood? What is it? The blood type determinants. What is transfusion reaction? And then ABO blood type on COVID 19 severity. Erythrocytes are part of the plasma in our blood. Fun fact, each millimeter of blood contains about 5 billion with a B erythrocytes, which is quite crazy. Um, they are also known as our red blood cells, which you've probably heard of. And there are little sacs of hemoglobin that are going to be surrounded by a membrane, and their job is to transport oxygen in the blood. Here we have a picture of what our red blood cells look like under a microscope. I could not find the microscopy magnification. It is a little blurred out in here, but it is just round little blobs of hemoglobin. Nothing fancy, but those are what our erythrocytes look like. So, erythrocyte shape and structure. We're going to get into the nitty gritty here. Erythrocytes have a shape that is biconcave. So they look like a flat disc that has a little baby dimple in the middle on each side of the disc. This shape is going to provide support for the very important function of a erythrocyte, and so it's going to increase the surface area. That way, more oxygen can diffuse into the and I'm sorry, more oxygen can diffuse from the plasma into the cell, so we can carry more and more oxygen. Another feature of red blood cells is the flexibility of the membrane. They're able to deform and contract and contort to fit almost single file through very thin capillaries all throughout our body in order to deliver oxygen at the tissue level without breaking. Because think about it, when you cut your finger open, um, blood comes pouring out. There's a lot of small capillaries in your finger as well that blood needs to get to. So our blood can kind of conform to fit into our tiny capillaries within our body. Another thing is that erythrocytes do not have a nucleus or really any organelles for that matter. That way they can make more room for the hemoglobin molecule so we can carry all of the oxygen available. I also found another fun fact in my research. Erythrocytes live a very, very short life, being replaced at an average rate of 2 to 3 million cells per second. That is crazy. So I keep mentioning this word hemoglobin, so we're going to go over what that is very briefly. Excuse me. Hemoglobin is only found in erythrocytes. It's going to consist of four folded polypeptide chains, so it is a protein. Those polypeptide chains are called globin, however you want to say it. And it has four hemigroups, hence hemoglobin or hemoglobin. These hemigroups are going to contain iron, and each are going to bind to one polypeptide, as you can see here in this picture. We have our four polypeptide chains that are highly folded. Each one has a hemigroup at the end of it that's going to carry iron. The iron atoms can combine reversibly with one molecule of oxygen, meaning that each hemoglobin molecule can carry four molecules of oxygen. So we have an oxygen here, 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 and here that is able to reversibly bind. The iron also is going to give hemoglobin its red color, and it's going to become very, very bright red when combined with oxygen and turns a darker red, almost blue color when deoxygenated. Once again, hemoglobin's main job is to transport oxygen. However, it does play a role in carbon dioxide transport, pH buffering, of ionized carbonic acid, and it's also able to biodazolate using nit- nitric oxide, on its own. So this whole presentation is about blood and blood type. So let's figure out what determines a blood type. Ultimately, it comes down to your antigens and your antibodies. Hopefully, you all know you all know your blood type. It's very important information, especially medically. And so, antigens are the molecules that are going to exist on the surface of a cell. They're almost like a cell marker that are going to trigger a specific immune response against itself. And then an antibody is going to bind to a specific antigen in order to destroy that antigen. So it's kind of like cops and robbers in your body, okay? There's special antigen antibody response, however, when it comes to our blood. So let's take a look at that. Inherited antigens are going to exist on the surface of your red blood cells, and there are four blood types. However, there are only two antigens. Let me see if I can move this out the way. So we have two antigens, A and B, and they can either exist together, separately, or not at all on our red blood cells. That is what RBCs mean. So our blood types are AB, and O. I know that was confusing. So people with type A blood have A antigens on their erythrocytes. Type B blood contains B antigens. Type AB has both A and B antigens, and type O has neither A or B antigens. So now that we know what antigens are present and how that determines a person's blood type, why is it even important? What is going to defend against these antigens? So there are antibodies that are present within the blood that are going to defend against erythrocyte antigens that are not present in the body. So what this means is that it's going to determine the blood that you are allowed to receive in a blood transfusion. For example, type A blood has A antigens, that's why it's type A blood, but it's going to have anti B antibodies. It doesn't want type B blood at all. It's going to attack those B antigens. And vice versa. Type B blood has B antigens with anti A antibodies. It does not want those A antigens coming into its body. AB blood, however, has both antigens, so it actually has no antibodies. And type O has neither A or B antigen, so it has both anti A and anti B antibodies. I know that was a lot. That is all kind of consolidated in this picture right here to tell you what are the antigens and antibodies present. So remember, antigens are what are going to attack the body, and antibodies are the defense. This is going to come into play when we start talking about receiving and donating blood. There we go. So this is just a little continuation that I could not fit all on that slide. So type O is known as the universal donor because they have neither antigen. They are not attacked by either antibody. So type O can be given to anybody. However, if you have type O blood, you can only receive type O blood because the antibodies in your body are going to attack A and B. However, the universal recipient is going to be type AB blood because they have neither antibody, so they can accept any blood type because they have no antibodies that will attack those A or B antigens. So now let's move on to transfusion reaction. Blood transfusions can be the difference between life and death in some scenarios, but it is very important to transfuse with the correct blood type. If a person is given blood of a incompatible type, two reactions take place. The first is this effect of the antibodies of the recipient, so the antibodies in the person receiving the transfusion, on the donor red blood cells. The second effect is from the donor's antibodies on the recipient's antigens. This second reaction is really only important if very large volumes of blood are being transfused, because the antibodies within the donor's blood are super diluted by the recipient's plasma. So very little erythrocyte damage is going to occur. The reason the effect of the recipient's antibodies on the donor's red blood cells, so reaction number one, is greater is because the donor's blood cells could clump or rupture. This is going to be caused by antibodies in the recipient's blood when they attack the donor's red blood cells, because antigens trigger that immune system to attack. So this can lead to a transfusion reaction, which can be fatal. And what's going to happen is our clumps of incoming donor cells are going to plug our very small blood vessels, which is going to restrict blood flow. And obviously, that's not good. We're taking oxygen away from parts of the body that need it to function. Another kind of reaction or byproduct of transfusion reaction is acute kidney failure, that can be caused by the release of very large amounts of hemoglobin. So, if a cell is going to rupture, hemoglobin is released from the erythrocytes, and hemoglobin is going to precipitate into the kidney, which is going to block our urine forming structure, ultimately leading to kidney failure. So here in this picture, we see a person receiving type A blood from a donor, and we know that the recipient is type B because anti-A antibodies are present. These antibodies are going to attack the donor cells because of the B antigen, so they're going to attack these antigens right here. And so these antigens that are present on the erythrocyte are attacked, and the response is that our blood is going to clump up, which can lead to reduced blood flow due to the clogging of blood vessels. So this is just kind of what that blood transfusion reaction would look like. So how could blood type affect COVID-19? So seeing that we all just came out of a global pandemic, and I kept seeing the word COVID-19 pop up every time I was typing in blood type, I decided to do a little bit of research because I thought it would be quite interesting. So, this one study investigated the association between ABO blood type and, excuse me, and COVID-19 severity. They measured severity based off of ICU admission, the need for intubation, length of hospitalization, and death. That's what they determined as severe COVID or unsevere COVID. They hypothesized that there was an association between ABO blood phenotype and COVID-19 susceptibility and severity. And so they reviewed 942 patients. That's what this N942 references, in the San Diego County, between 5 Scripps hospitals. However, only 473 had available blood types, so this is what became our sample size overall. And so, determine if there is a link between ABO blood type and severity disease. They ended up grouping them by blood type and other variable characteristics, such as comorbid conditions, labs of interest, medication, some demographic and characteristics as well. And they compared those using chi-square analysis and ANOVA. And this is where we start to get our results. So the results showed that 30.23% infected had type A, 56.45% had type O, 9.51% were type B, 3.81 were type AB. And so this might sound like, oh, there's an effect, but when you start to look at phenotypic ratios and percentages within populations as a whole, this tends to be on trend with what we're seeing. We see a lot of type O, a little bit more type A, a little less type B, and then obviously the most rare is type AB. That's pretty much normal and on trend with our phenotype populations in general. So um, I was reading further and found this picture in the article that shows the odd ratios plotted for measurements of severity. Remember, that was length of hospitalization, need for intubation, ICU admission, and death. And so they ended up comparing all of it relative to type A blood. And what I thought was interesting is that the odds of death was actually lower among type B blood relative to type A, according to this plot down at the bottom. However, overall, this article concluded that there was no significant association found between ABO blood type and COVID 19 severity. However, I do think some improvements on this research could be a larger sample size outside of just the San Diego area. Maybe a national sample size could produce varying data. Um, so that is where this study could improve. Overall, these are my sources. I hope that you learned something and have a blessed day.